These are truly remarkable times. We are facing the biggest health crisis since the Spanish flu, and subsequently probably also the deepest recession in 100 years. We have restraints on civil liberties around the world. We have disrupted supply chains, which will probably never be the same again. And all of this while we are confronted with a dangerous lack of leadership international, and also with a lack of trust in international relations. And this is exactly why Tony Roldan from EsadeEcPol and we at FNF Madrid joined forces to start asking some important questions that have to be raised against the background of the circumstances that I have just mentioned.
The outlook for the economy looks bad. Some analysts think it's going to look more like the Great Depression. Some others think it's going to be more like the Great Recession. It's definitely different in many ways. How bad do you expect it to be?
If it's very short-lived, I think we have a chance of having a deep recession, but then a quick recovery. However, there are two things that stand in the way of that happy outcome. One is that we have to preserve what one might call employment relationships. You know, a firm is not just a bunch of machines and a bunch of employees. A firm is a bunch of people who've come together, who've been recruited, who've been selected, who've learned to work together. And a lot of the productive value of a firm is in that combination of human beings. If because of lack of cash, lack of liquidity, you're forced to send those people home, and then 6 months or a year from now, you say, well, guys, come back, we'll start production again. Many will be gone, many will have another job, many will have moved to a different city or a different country. So the lasting effect on productivity could be gigantic. That's issue one. The other issue, of course, is that if a firm has no cash, it may default on its workers. It may also default on its creditors. That means not paying your debts. And it is very easy to envision situations in which a productive unemployment crisis morphs into a financial crisis. Rich countries, countries with powerful central banks, have many ways of avoiding that. And we've been seeing the Fed, the ECB, the Bank of England, doing things that would have sent most academics home with a heart attack just a few months ago, not simply buying government bonds, buying corporate bonds, buying junk corporate bonds. So I think there's a pretty good chance that in Europe and the UK and the US, a full-fledged financial crisis may be averted. If you're a middle-class citizen in a middle-class country, you can go home for 2 months, not make any money, come back, get your paycheck in month 3 and live with it. If you're a guy who sells candy in the bus or on the sidewalk in Mumbai or in Sao Paulo or in Manila, chances are you don't have any savings, you don't have any other sources of income. So if you don't go out and work, you simply don't eat. Secondly, because lots of firms in developing countries are informal firms and lots of employment relationships are employment, government can't step in and say, I'll pay your wage for 3 months because there's no contract, there's no pre-specified wage. Who is the government going to pay? At what rate is it going to pay? And in addition, lots of emerging countries are suffering from sort of not a double whammy, but a quadruple whammy. There's less demand for their exports from rich countries. The prices of commodities, beginning with oil but not ending with oil, are in the basement. Some important sources of income, like remittances, say from the US or from Europe, to countries like Mexico or Guatemala or the Philippines, are plummeting. And last but not least, we've seen in the last couple of months the biggest capital outflows that we have ever seen. So if it's going to be big in the rich world, it is going to be bigger probably in the developing world.
For the last 60, 70 years, since the Second World War, the large amounts of progress we have achieved in many ways are related to the globalization and to the free movement of people. What are your views on this? Is that change going to be structural? What do you think? How is this going to affect globalization?
Everything to how we travel in planes, to how we travel in trains, to how we stand in beaches or in our holidays, our restaurants, etc., is going to have to change. And that affects, crucially, a lot of what globalization has achieved. I don't think over the next few months and over the foreseeable future, we're going to just be able to jump on a plane and go to another country for the weekend, etc. If some countries, let's say the Schengen area, manages to contain this, then it's really endemic in places, for example, like Africa or like Latin America. You can envision clearly how borders will be closed and people will be told they cannot come from certain places.
There is a risk in this crisis that we engage in confirmation bias, meaning enemies of globalization are saying, yes, of course, this is the end of globalization. People worried about inequality are saying the crisis will deepen inequality. People who worry about XYZ are saying, yeah, I told you, XYZ were going to be an issue. I would be a little bit more careful. I agree with Luis that there are two dimensions in which we will see changes. Clearly, in the mobility of people, we were seeing changes, at least in Europe, long before this crisis, and some of that will continue. Parenthetically, I will note, just as a footnote, that the flows of people that cause much concern and political crises in Europe are tiny by the kind, compared to the flows of people we're seeing in other parts of the world. And where essential or strategic supplies are concerned, yes, I think we may see a bit more government intervention. But I think the firms themselves will begin to look at making supply chains more secure, more than a 0-1 black and white situation in which is all globalization, no globalization. I think you may have a reshuffling of globalizations in which there are some winners and there are some losers, but I'm pretty sure we will continue to trade.
So yeah, continuing with what you say, I find really relevant the debate as regards to what's going to happen with populism and nationalism.
So my first point is we should not simply sit, have a drink and expect that because they are bungling incompetence, the populists will be booted out. That would be way too optimistic, way too complacent. Now, I think what will really make a difference is whether coming out of this crisis, the populations feel that it was hard, we suffered, but we were all in it together, as opposed to, once again, some people got a privilege, some people got an easy ride, others did not. I'm speaking from West London right now, and I've been talking to lots of my English friends about London today compared to London in 1940. The city was locked down back then, the city is locked down today. And what many English historians say, I'm reading a great book about London during the war, is that the sense of national unity and national purpose that has been very clear in the UK for the last 40 years, even during some pretty bad economic times in the 60s and 70s, came from the fact that the war was terrible, but the British stood shoulder to shoulder, and they defeated the fascists, they defeated the Nazis, and the rich guy from Oxford and the poor kid from a mining town both were in the same trench fighting the same enemy. If Western countries can come out of this crisis in the spirit in which people, applaud the NHS every Thursday night in London, or in the spirit in which people in Barcelona or Madrid applaud health workers, or in New York, they do exactly the same thing, and people clap to show respect for first responders. In that sense, I think the institutions of liberal democratic government will have been strengthened. They will be viewed as they work for us. They don't necessarily just work for them. But I can also imagine an outcome which is not 1945. It looks more like 2010, in which people say there are these academics and these lawyers and these professionals who are sitting in their comfortable apartments, and they keep working from home and they keep getting paychecks. And I work in a pizza parlor, and the pizza parlor is closed, and I can't do my job, and I'm not getting paid. So society again fragments into many identities, and some identities feel disrespected and mistreated by other people. In which case, almost regardless of public policy, the institution of government and the institution of liberal democracy will come out a little shaken. Which one of the two will it be? I think, as I say in the United States, the jury's still out. but we will know pretty soon.
So how do you think the inequality story will affect politics, and how do you think we can change that, or we can influence to minimize in the best possible way the inequalities that are rising?
The biggest gap in this crisis is between those who can work at home and those who can't. So the difference between those who can work at home and those who can't is a difference that is going to affect information workers that were already helped by the information revolution versus the rest. So that's something that goes in the same direction as past changes. But there is one thing that I think is important. In the past, let's say in the 1990s, when you would ask any of us, what do you think the internet will do? And we think it will go against big cities and in favor of rural areas. That didn't happen. The internet helped cities because people wanted to bump on each other, and creative types want to be together with other creative types. Now, this one is different, in my opinion. I think that the attractiveness of a city, when you cannot go to a restaurant, to a bar, to a museum, to the concert, for a walk, blah, blah, versus living in a little town or in a village where you can just walk around the mountains. If you can get internet and you want to work at home, I think rural versus urban is maybe one vector of inequality that is going to go in a different direction in the past. Rural is going to actually benefit potentially. Agriculture also, but also a primary sector, but also just simply living out of the big towns. On demographics, those are people who came out of university in the crisis or of high school in the crisis, who had a few very, very hard years, who have seen situation just improving from, let's say, 2015, 16, who've started to get more steady jobs. Remember, in Spain, we had 14% unemployment still. And this same generation now is 38, 36, 40, and is getting hit by a second blow. I think that that is a generation that is going to suffer most. They haven't been able to accumulate assets. And when we do policy, we have to think of that generation. And third, geographically, I don't want to make distinction north-south that was so well done by Andres, but I want to make a distinction north-south inside the European Union. By a mix of bad luck and bad government, the worst countries hit in the European Union have been the ones with higher debt and most hit by the 2008 crisis, Spain and Italy. The geographic tensions inside the European Union are going to be very, very big and are going to have potentially very difficult consequences for Europe.
Thanks so much, Luis. Andres, it's been fascinating to hear you both. Thank you, everyone, for following us. Thanks, the Friedrich Naumann Foundation, for bringing about this initiative. And thanks to all. I hope I'll see you very soon.